Good morning. We are delighted to have today with us Professor Ashish Nanda from Harvard Business School. Professor Nanda is C. Roland Christensen Distinguished Management Educator at Harvard. It's an honor to have you here, Ashish. You did your bachelor's degree from IIT Bombay.
Delhi.
IIT Delhi. IIT Delhi. And then you did your MBA, or what is it called, PGDM?
PGDM.
From IIM Ahmedabad. And then you went to Harvard Business School for your PhD, right? And after that you have been teaching there for a long time. You were also director of IIM Ahmedabad for from 13 to 17?
Absolutely right.
Yeah. So we had the opportunity to have your direct contribution to education in India during that time, and what you did, how you led IIM Ahmedabad during that time. It's well known for the whole country. So it's such a pleasure to have you, Ashish. We had yesterday a master class by you, and students, faculty, everybody has been absolutely delighted with that class. The case study on Boeing versus Airbus, that was amazing class. So in this podcast, I'm just going to ask you a couple of questions just to sort of pick your brains and brainstorm about certain ideas that we are all educators are confronted with today. So let me just start with some crystal ball gazing. You know, we have today lots of disruptive technologies coming up. You know, generative AI is just one, but lots of disruptions due to technology. And these disruptions are now such that it's very hard to see what the consequences are going to be, to the point that most of us are nervous about it, right? And the second problem we are confronted with is we see all these catastrophic climate events. It's like we are paying for our past sins that we not necessarily committed knowingly, but we did. And the third is information overload that all of us have. Much more problem it is causing to the youth. So in the face of these three things, how do you see we prepare our youth for the future? That's the business we are all in. How do we prepare the youth for the future?
Right. So let me begin actually, RP, by first thanking you for being such wonderful and gracious host at Plaksha. I have truly enjoyed my visit, and I was so extraordinarily impressed. Of course, I had been hearing from you and from your colleagues about the various things you were doing, but actually experiencing is quite another level. I was so impressed by not only the absolute world-class physical facilities you have, which are important, but also the energy and the enthusiasm and the obvious smarts of your students. So clearly you're doing a good job in your recruitment of students and then teaching them, and so I felt really very good through my interactions in the class, and then meeting with your faculty, who are all imbued with the spirit of can-do. So congratulations for what you are building here at Plaksha, and I feel very honored to be associated within it in a small way. So
thank you so much. You're so kind.
No, and absolutely, it's not kind. It's just something I feel very proud of, and I thank you and everyone else. I know these things don't happen by themselves, so really appreciate it. To your question, I think I would say a few things. I would say three things. First thing is, in a world, and I agree with you, it's a world of tremendous transitions and change. You can look at many dimensions. You have identified 3 of those, which I think are very salient, but there are many dimensions of change, and there's a term people have been using quite a lot in various contexts. I think it particularly fits today's time. It's an inflection point. There's so much change happening. And when you are at an inflection point, you're absolutely right. There's uncertainty about the future might bring. There is also a degree of concern about what the future might be like. But I would say the other side of the coin of concern is that there's a sense of excitement about what you might be able to do. So perhaps more than at other times, what people who are going through our educational system today, what they do will shape the world we'll be in. It is probably going to be more than before. So what can we do in our educational institutions, I guess was your question, to help them flourish in this world? I think the first thing is simply this realization that the future is going to be very different from the past helps a lot. Because what it does is, of course, we teach them a little bit of facts, we teach them a little bit of frameworks, etc. But the thing with facts and frameworks is that very often they have half-lives. And in times of dramatic change, those half-lives become very short. I'm reminded of something that the dean of Harvard Medical School used to say to students on the first day of their class. People would get into Harvard Medical School and they would then have a convocation which is everybody gathers, and the dean would say, "Welcome to Harvard Medical School. I have good news and bad news for you." Well, the good news is that 50% of what you learn over the next 4 years in the medical school will be proven to be wrong in the next 10 years. And the bad news is we have no idea what that 50% is. So, if you are going to rely in your education on facts and on frameworks alone, it's going to have a short half-life. What we are going to try and do is develop in our students 2 capabilities. One is a perspective, a way of looking at problems. So it's not, this is the framework to hold, but when you are faced with a problem, how do you address it? A discipline. And the second thing I think is a little bit of sense of their own strengths and their own values, which will help them address the future in a meaningful manner. What do I care about? What are my capabilities? It gives them a sense of confidence, a sense of also knowledge where they need support, and a way of thinking where it is that exercise of their energy and passion will have the greatest result. So being clear as we are going through our education, of course, to teach them facts and frameworks, but to go beyond that in building a sense of capability on addressing problems and a sense of self-knowledge. I think that will help. That's one observation. Second observation I would make is increasingly we have to educate people not just to flourish in the existing world, but actually how to work proactively to create the world of tomorrow. And so something I know Plaksha is very consciously sensitive to, developing an entrepreneurial instinct, innovative instinct, which is don't just look at where the world is and say, how am I going to fit into it? Ask yourself the question, how can I shape the world of tomorrow? And because a lot of what they are going to be doing is in fact the entrepreneurial innovative as opposed to just going in and operational. The last thing I would suggest is people tend to think when you go into the workspace that you are either in a competitive space or you are in a cooperative space, you are either doing operational work or you are doing innovative. As we know, reality is actually a mix of these. I have a wonderful colleague who now teaches at Stern School. His name is Adam Brandenburger. He coined this world. He said the world of tomorrow is going to be co-opetition, which is you work with people you are competing with to create a better world. So building that ability in people to not do this or that, but this and that. to work with people, to compete with people, to make sure that you are operating in the system and you are creating the world. So, I guess those capabilities will become more important. So, three things. Number one, understanding perspective, building perspective and building values. Number two, making sure that as you are going through your kind of world, you are not just operating, you are also creating. And number three, building capabilities like scenario planning, how I'll adjust to different parts of the world, co-opetition, some flexibility, agility, and. So, these three things, if we imbue in our students, they are going to flourish.
Fantastic. So, what I hear is developing perspective, extremely important, self-awareness and leadership. That's what is going to shape the future, or they are going to shape the future. And then this co-opetition that you talked about, wonderful word. I like that. While you were talking about co-opetition, it just occurred to me that right now, innovation which is coming through a lot of research is moving in a strange direction that we haven't seen before. Research is becoming extremely expensive, particularly in areas like large language models or generative AI, these things that we are most concerned about today. It requires billions of dollars today, and it seems that only large corporations can do this kind of research. So, it is moving away from this kind of research, moving away from the university research where we can't afford it, goes into corporations which are going to hold it, because they make money from those IPs and those services. But the consequences are going to be humongous, and it seems like the power might shift to corporations. Do you think governments are going to become pawns in the hands of corporations? I mean, this is a thought-provoking. I mean, it's a little bit of a
no, it's a very
provocative question, but
no, it's not just provocative. It is thought-provoking, and it is something that people are concerned about. And it's not just power moving from government to corporations. It is also a question whether corporations will pursue the public interest or they will pursue purely the interests of their shareholders. In fact, the current head of the principal regulatory authority in USA, Lina Khan, she in fact built her reputation when she was a Yale Law School student, writing a wonderful article which said that organizations, platform organizations like Amazon was the example she took, are they good for society because they are able to provide goods at very low prices, or do they cause some harms also by basically stifling innovation and killing competition?
Right.
And so, this is a very live debate that right now regulators the world over are having. How much power are giant corporations actually accumulating? And how do we make sure that they use that power, market power, for the good of society overall? And that has led to, and there are different versions of it. One version is people, you must have heard this, people say information is the new oil.
Right, yeah,
and
yeah.
who owns the
That,
information on
correct.
individuals?
Right.
These are things like privacy rights and so on. There's also this issue that investments in major research projects, whether it is in pharmaceutical drug discovery or it is, as you mentioned, large language models, etc., requires enormous upfront investments,
Right.
and gives perhaps a first mover advantage, which makes it very difficult for people to really break into tight, big oligopolies. These are concerns that regulators the world over have, and in fact regulators the world over are passing some laws to constrain and limit some of this competition. So, we are already seeing some of this happen partly in Europe quite aggressively, mainly because at least the Americans will laugh and say, Europe is good with regulation because none of the large tech companies are based in Europe, so they have been on the forefront. But it is a concern.
Yeah.
And again, developing countries, India has its own rules and norms that it has come up with, which are trying to make sure that the growing power available to private enterprise is not misused and that it is constrained. Now, that can of course go to an extreme also. So, for example, China has a walled garden where everything, at least in the information technology space,
Right.
is governed by the government. So, there is this thing happening, which is corporations are gaining increasing power. Governments are concerned about it. I would also point out that it is not necessary that all governments necessarily act in their society's best interest. Sometimes government acts in the best interest of the government,
Right.
which may not be society. So, it may not be a great world either if all the power is with governments. You know, maybe it's good to democratize some of that power. So, one, some organizations are becoming powerful. Two, some governments have tried to use their power on policy to constrain and limit and use technology as a means to exert that power. But there is a third thing that has been happening, which one can call the open source movement, which is partly because, and it's primarily in information technology, but other areas also, partly because technology has become so prevalent. People in very many different geographical locations, physical boundaries have become less meaningful.
Right.
People in different locations can collaborate together on projects, work, things that they are doing, and it's most visible in spaces like coding, software development, but it's happening in many, many spheres. And what I'm pointing to is what people call the open source approach, as opposed to walled garden approach. People partnering with one another across boundaries. So, all these three things are happening together. Where will this lead to? My feeling is governments will try to counter some of the larger organizations by regulation. So, there will be greater regulation on those organizations to keep their power in check. It has happened in the past. If you look, whenever organizations, business organizations have tended to become powerful, regulations have been brought in to constrain them across the world. And so, that will happen more. There will be greater democratization of power. And so, for a country like India, this actually offers a wonderful opportunity. There will be greater degree of ability to partner across organizational boundaries. You don't have to be an employee to be working with an organization. Governments will be willing to partner with private enterprise. You look at India's, by the way, I feel so fortunate to be in India right now. Everybody is talking about our Chandrayaan 3.
Right. Yes.
Our ISRO is a wonderful example of a private-public partnership, and we will see more and more of those. So, I feel that organizational boundaries will become a little bit more porous, and you are going to be able to actually work across geographical boundaries also if you have the smarts. India has young people. India has young people who are ambitious, who are eager to learn and contribute. You are going to have more porous borders. It's an opportunity, I think, in India, not as much a risk.
Fantastic. This is great. And you brought out these two aspects, right? That, okay, there is power in the hands of corporations, but will corporations work only for shareholders or for social good? This is something that we need to debate and discuss for our youth as well. You know, when we are preparing them for innovation, for, you know, technology, leadership, all these things that we are doing, entrepreneurship, there are students who are driven by, let's say, what financial gains they might have, what kind of life they might have, great salaries or great income, through entrepreneurship. There are students who are also driven by social good, right? You would like to see bit of both in all our youth that we educate, right? How do we go about striking this balance? That the motivation can't just be that you are all by yourself well off, but that the your surrounding, everybody is well off, and that's the social good, right? So how do we drive that into our youth?
Yeah, great question, RP. And I begin with an observation. Over the last several decades, I've had the great joy of having Indian students, both in India when I was teaching here and was director here, and also in the US when we've always had students come from India. And I have been struck by their balanced sense of, you're absolutely right, doing well for themselves and doing good for the world. So I have actually a great deal of confidence in India's youth. I think they will, given the resources and the capacity, find a way to make the world better. And part of that is because of the culture of our society,
right,
and part of that is role models like you, RP, and people who they see and who they value and respect of an older generation, and they see the folks that have really had an impact have actually had a balance of these qualities. So on balance, I actually feel that I don't need to do much of social engineering. All I need to do is have confidence in the youth of today and give them an opportunity to flourish in the best way possible. I'm a little bit of my PhD was in economics, so I'm a little bit of a revealed preference kind of a guy. And so I think I don't mind if people want to pursue wealth, because very often people who pursue wealth also create wealth, particularly if it is through entrepreneurship. And if people will become more powerful and more successful, I have reasonable confidence that they will also try to do good to people around them. So I don't have that much of a desire to push them in one direction or the other. What I want to do is two things. One is expose them to role models, people who have pursued their vision, sometimes against what is hot in the short run, to have a huge impact over a period of time. Give them exposure to some of those examples. And the second thing is take away some of the barriers that prevent people, particularly early in their career, from doing what their heart desires. So for example, I have heard in some settings people say, I really want to do well for society, but I've taken student loans and I'm graduating from my college and I need to first pay my loans. I need to first earn a lot and then I will probably contribute. And what that leads to is early years, there's a feeling of burdensome work that they are doing not having meaning. And so to create mechanisms whereby we are able to free them of those concerns. So for example, if we are giving loans to students, forgive the loans if they are working on something which has a social good, give them an encouragement and support institutionally if they want to work in something which is institutional, to get them placed over there, to give them social recognition there. So those soft tools I want to do, building in them a sense of ethics and importance of contributing to society, at least exposing that to that. But beyond that, let them free and let them spread their wings with the confidence that they are actually going to deliver a lot of value to society, even as they do well in their lives.
Wow. So, you talked about showing them role models, so that they have inspiration. Plaksha is a great example of that, right? Our founders, all our founders have gone out. They are wealth creators. They created wealth. And look how they are giving back, through complete philanthropic contributions. So I think our students here certainly have a lot of role models. And you are right, in a way I do see in my in founders of Plaksha that culture of India is so strong for giving that this is coming back to all of them. You can see it, right? That they are wealth creators, but they are also acutely aware of how they need to contribute to society, and nothing like contributing through education. So, we are on the right path there. Talking of which, I want your thoughts on Plaksha itself, that we have an opportunity. This is a new university, right? We can rewrite the rule book for higher education. And I often say that I derive lot of inspiration from Takshila University, because it was the first ever university in the world, and therefore it rewrote everything. I mean, it wrote everything. Not read, it wrote everything, right? Absolutely fascinating time and place for Takshila to flourish. So we have an opportunity to rewrite. We have an opportunity to change the narrative of how we think about higher education. What would your suggestions be for us?
Well, thank you. Thank you for this very thoughtful question and observation. I actually want to go back a little bit in terms of role models, and I want to give you another example. So, Harvard Business School, people very often call it the West Point of capitalism. All right. What's the first case study all the entering students in our MBA program are taught? First case study they are taught is Narayan Rudalaya.
Oh.
Okay. And we begin with the question, and again, I'm not very close to Dr. Devi Shetty or any such thing. But the first question we ask them is this person a philanthropist who has hit upon a business idea? Or is this an entrepreneur who is putting on a social kind of an image to sell his business? The case is a fantastic discussion. But by the end of the case, the emphasis is it's not either or, it's and. The basic question is, has he in his professional and personal career made an impact on the lives of people? And that's what we kind of encourage our students.
Right.
So I'm saying not only through the extraordinary direct models of your founders and people who keep coming back and sharing their stories, and their actions speak louder to the students, but also in how you teach and the vision that you share with people. The examples should be not only creating economic value for themselves, but also creating social wealth around them. So that's on the first one. But I'll come to your question now, which is role for Plaksha. First of all, I think the timing is very fortuitous. If you were to ask anyone around, by the way, economists don't agree on many things. So if they agree on a few things, I get nervous. Virtually all economists agree that the next few years are going to be very meaningful for India for a variety of geopolitical and macroeconomic, social reasons. People are predicting that unless something unforeseen happens, we are in for a period of sustained growth over the next several years. This is a wonderful, wonderful time to be a young person in India, given the scope of opportunities that are likely to open up over the next decade and 2 decades. And for an institution to be equipping them to succeed in this world over the next decade, 2 decades, is an extraordinary, that's why I call it a fortuitous circumstance, is an extraordinary circumstance. I also think the vision that you have is actually very applicable. Go back to your first question, to a world which is going through extraordinary transitions. Because what is your vision? You're teaching them stuff which is interdisciplinary. You're teaching them stuff which is applicable, really has an impact. You're teaching them stuff which has relevance to society. I think these three pillars will stand the students in very good stead, because opportunities are going to be really, really significant if you look at these three aspects. Applicable, not at the core, but at the interstices and overlaps of disciplines, and valued by and needed by society. So I think this is really, really, if you can continue to stay true to your vision with a degree of rigor, which is people work hard to achieve this, and consistency, reminding yourselves, reminding your students to be consistent in keeping these dimensions in mind, your values in mind, which are so wonderful, and try to continue to make them comfortable and capable in delivering on these dimensions. I think it's going to be wonderful for your graduating students, and you are going to be proud of the contributions you've made to society in a decade or in 2 decades. So I wish you all good fortune. The stars seem to be aligned at this time.
Thank you, thank you. Thank you so much. This is, of course, I mean, we are putting everything that we can along these directions that you mentioned. In our tech education, interdisciplinary education, as you said, is our reimagined education. But we are also putting in along with that. So what is reimagined tech education? I mean, obviously, today's youth, as you pointed out, that young people of India have huge opportunity. We train them very rigorously on mathematical foundations, on digital competencies, computational thinking, right? Also, social awareness. So our courses in humanities are meant to engage with society, not just an intellectual exercise, but engage with society and how technology is enmeshed. Design thinking, and on top of that, entrepreneurship and leadership, which you have always advocated. So that is the mix that we have put for education. And research, which our faculty members are involved in, is all focused on grand challenges, big problems. But it's not just because those are the problems we want to solve. We also involve our undergraduates in that research from semester 1, bit by bit, to get them a feel for what kind of problems are we confronted with today. What are the big problems, not just as problem statement, but how do you parse them into bite-sized pieces? How do you attack them, right, that you mentioned? How do you develop a perspective for these things? So that's the journey we are taking. But by taking this journey, we are also acutely aware that we are very different from what other schools are doing. And that does make you nervous, right? That, when our graduates go out in the world, are they going to find that, there are companies which are only looking for very narrow specializations, right? I want a mechanical engineer, electrical engineer. What's your thought?
Yeah.
That what do you think?
Yeah. So you put it very very well. So you are right to be nervous, but I would point to 2 things. One is this thing is like a flywheel, particularly because you're so different from others. Initially, there is the greatest degree of uncertainty and the greatest amount of effort. The first cohort, making sure that they truly get good, rigorous education, making sure that you are able to encourage organizations to see the value of these students and give them an opportunity to demonstrate it. And over time, if you continue to make this effort consistently, it becomes easier and easier as reputation builds. You will learn through your experience. Organizations will see how capable some of these people are. On the recruitment side, people will begin to, already I have been very impressed by people, but you'll get even, that quality keeps developing, and then it becomes easier. So what I would suggest is, if you have confidence in the direction to go, and let me say one other thing, which is why entrepreneurship is so important. You are not just training these people to go to other organizations and fit in there. Many of them at some point early in their careers or later may actually strike out on their own and do something by themselves. But giving them the resources to succeed in their early years is absolutely critical. So one is, I appreciate this degree of nervousness, but the encouragement would be stay with it if you believe in your vision. Second thing I would say in this is, for you to really succeed, you should go for quality over scale in the early years, which I think you are doing already.
Right, yes.
Don't go for large classes or so and so. Get a good small to mid-sized class, give them an excellent educational experience, invest in making this flywheel go around. So that's kind of one observation. Second observation is, would you rather be the 17th engineering school doing similar kind of stuff for people, or would you rather be a differentiated, distinct school doing things differently from others in a way that you think is consistent with the future? I teach strategy at Harvard, and I think differentiation is a much better strategy, provided you think there's a market for the differentiated product, as opposed to a Me Too strategy.
Right.
So all of which boils down to, do you have confidence that the qualities you are training them for and the fields you are investing in, and I love the way you said it, that we are giving them rigorous education, rigorous fundamentals on which the building blocks of other things like. If you are confident that there is need for these people, you will do very well. I am confident. So just stick with it, and you're already done a lot of wonderful work. Just keep doing it over a few years. It's 4 years to the first batch coming through, a few years after that. One of the challenging things in educational systems, unlike in some of the product businesses, is that the time it takes for proof of concept tends to be measured not in weeks or months, but perhaps decade.
Right.
But work on it. What you are engaged in is institution building, capacity building. If you continue on it in a consistent manner, I think we will all be proud of what we have done.
We are certainly absolutely committed to that, and there will be no let-ups, no ifs and buts in there. Rigorous education, preparing leaders, technology leaders of tomorrow is what our mission is.
Right.
And in that, whenever we have opportunity like this to get our ideas bounced off, validated with scholars like you, it always boosts our confidence. It's such a pleasure. It's such a help, right? It's a fraternity.
Absolutely.
Of
it's not
education.
And from my side, I must say, I feel whatever little, and it is little, whatever little input I can give, I feel is something that I feel very good about, because you are trying to do something which is truly impactful and meaningful for India. And I really salute you. By you, I mean the entire institution, for what you're trying to achieve, and wish you the best and want to contribute in whatever small way I can.
On that note, thank you so much, Ashish.
Thank
you.
you,
It has been
RP.
such a pleasure talking to you.
Good luck.